Scary Stories is a series of 3 collections of short horror stories for children written by Alvin Schwartz and originally illustrated by Stephen Gammell. The 3 books each feature numerous short stories in the horror genre. Author Alvin Schwartz drew heavily from folklore and urban legends as the topic of his stories. The 3 books were Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, published on October 14, 1981, More Scary Stories to Tell on October 31, 1984, and the third and final book, Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones, published on September 1st, 1991. And growing up in the 90s and reading these books and loving them, I decided to give my top 10 favorite stories from each book, broken up into 3 videos, starting with the first book. Keep in mind, not all of these stories were scary. In fact, some were just songs and poems. With that being said, sit back and relax, and maybe you'll remember some of these classic stories yourself. This story is about a woman who is invited to a dance but has nothing to wear. Her thrifty mother suggests that she rent an outfit, so she does. She has a wonderful time dancing the night away until she feels dizzy and decides to leave. Once home, she gets to bed. The next morning, her mom finds her dead. An autopsy indicates the woman who was poisoned by embalming fluid. The pawnbroker, who bought the garment from an undertaker's helper, who must have taken it off a corpse, and the embalming fluid that had rubbed off on it entered the woman's skin as she got sweaty. This one's about a girl who makes a bet to stand on a grave. She's instructed to stick a knife into the dirt to prove that she was there. She plunges the knife into the ground of a grave she fancies, but what she doesn't realize is that she lets it pierce her skirt first, which means she's jerked back and falls to the ground when she tries to leave. She spends the night screaming for help, but her friends don't bother to look for her until later, and by that time she's died of fright. An aggressive truck driver tails the protagonist while flashing his brights. It's the twist, however, that reveals the true horror. The truck driver had actually been trying to warn the driver that a person was in the back seat waiting to strike. Each time the villain rose with a knife in its hand to stab the truck driver flashed his lights to scare the villain back to the shadows. Here we have Sam offering to carry a woman's basket. You can't really make out this woman's face because it's bundled up in a scarf. No sooner than when Sam takes the basket does he hear from the woman saying, "That's very nice of you," laughing. Sam freaks and the woman's body and her disembodied head begin chasing him and biting his legs. A classic story. The call is coming from inside the house. The man upstairs ends up being apprehended by the cops before he can do anything. In this story, a hearse driver begins stalking Joseph Blackwell and calling to him, "There's room for one more." Joseph ignores him until he comes across the same guy at the elevator office. Sure enough, someone says there's room for one more. Joseph squishes in before realizing it's the hearse driver, and off to hell they plummet. A haunted house where every night a bloody head would come down the chimney. Nobody would stay there overnight, so a rich man offered $200 to whoever could do it, so a boy said he would try if he could have his dog with him. They sat there for a while, then they heard someone singing, then his dog responded back, goes back and forth until the head drops down the chimney and looks at them. A farmer's daughter falls in love with his farmhand named Jim. The farmer doesn't think he's good enough for her, so he keeps him apart. Then Jim gets sick and eventually dies, possibly from a broken heart. The farmer feels guilty for Jim and doesn't tell his daughter. One night she hears a knock on her door. Jim, standing there, says her father asked him to come get her. They left, and he complained of a headache. She put her hand on his head and said he was cold as clay, and he put her handkerchief around his head. When they return to the farm, the horse and the farmhand vanish, leaving the father unable to keep a secret. They open up his casket to discover his corpse is still there, but with the handkerchief around his head. After being murdered by her lover for her money, a woman haunts the last place she was alive. A well-meaning preacher catches wind that this haunt is happening and sets out to remedy it. She requests that the preacher dig up her hidden bone so that she could rest properly before instructing him to take her ring-clad pinky finger to church to place in the collection plate. The preacher does as he's told. The following Sunday, when the collection plate gets passed, the finger sticks to the killer, which leads to his confession and hanging. In this tale, two men are faced with a skeleton dressed in black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. The men and the skeleton play a little cat and mouse game, the skeleton following the men as they run away, only to eventually leave them alone. Years later, however, one of them becomes sick, and as he deteriorates, he looks more and more like the skeleton. Well, those were my top 10 favorite stories from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Let me know which ones were your favorite, and I'll see you in the next one.